A tense silence enveloped the camp as Moses, the man who had conversed with the Almighty, returned. 40 long years had passed since he fled Egypt, abandoning a life of luxury for the harsh wilderness. Now he was back, his face etched with the lines of time, his staff a testament to divine power, his mission to liberate the Israelites from the chains of generations of slavery. Pharaoh, the self-proclaimed God-king of Egypt, dismissed Moses' plea with a cold laugh. "Let your people go," he mocked. "Who is this God that dares to command me?" He turned a blind eye to the suffering of the Israelites, refusing to acknowledge their pain or the power of Moses' God. With a heavy heart, Moses delivered God's message, his voice trembling with sorrow. "If you refuse to release my people," Moses warned, "Egypt will be struck by plagues unlike any you have ever seen." But Pharaoh's heart remained stone. "Let the plagues come," he thought. His heart hardened against the desperate cries of Moses and the Israelites. The sun rose over Egypt, casting its golden rays across the Nile, but this morning something was dreadfully wrong. The lifeblood of Egypt, the mighty Nile, ran red, thick and viscous, like blood. The stench of death filled the air, a suffocating reminder of the wrath of Moses' God. Fear gripped the Egyptians. The Nile was more than a river. It was their lifeline, their source of water, food, and transportation. Now it was a source of horror and revulsion. Pharaoh, however, remained unyielding. He refused to be moved by what he saw as mere illusions. His magicians, he claimed, could replicate such wonders, and so the charade began. Pharaoh's magicians, with their incantations and illusions, managed to mimic the plague, turning water into blood, but their magic was hollow, a feeble imitation of the raw power unleashed by God. Section 4. A plague of frogs. The foul odor of the Nile grew unbearable as the second plague struck Egypt. Frogs, slimy and countless, surged from the river, a living, croaking tide. They overran the land, covering every inch of ground, every surface, every wall. The Egyptians, already traumatized by the blood-red river, were driven to despair by the relentless amphibians. The creatures invaded their homes, their beds, their food. There was no escape from the incessant croaking, the slimy bodies, the overwhelming stench. Pharaoh, though shaken by the relentless onslaught, clung to his pride. He summoned Moses, his voice strained, and offered a desperate plea. "Rid my land of this plague," he begged, "and I will let your people go." Moses, ever faithful to God's word, raised his staff. The frogs, as if on command, began to die, their rotting corpses adding to the stench that filled the air. Chapter 5. The pestilence spreads. The brief moment of peace was shattered. The air, now heavy with the foul stench of decay, became a breeding ground for the third plague lice. Tiny, biting insects swarmed relentlessly, infesting every human and animal. The Egyptians, already weakened and weary from the previous plagues, were driven to the brink of madness by the relentless itching and burning. The lice were everywhere, in their clothing, their hair, their beds. They scratched until their skin bled, but the tormenting itch never ceased. Pharaoh's magicians, their bodies covered in painful bites, tried desperately to replicate the plague, but their magic failed them, leaving them in despair. With growing horror, they realized this was the work of a god beyond their understanding, beyond their control. Section 6. The Boils of Egypt. As the lice receded, a new horror emerged. Painful, festering boils erupted on the skin of the Egyptians. The boils, oozing and raw, covered their bodies, a torment that surpassed even the lice. The stench of sickness and decay permeated the air, a constant reminder of the wrath of God. The Egyptians, their bodies weakened by pain and infection, could only lie in agony, their cries for relief echoing unanswered. Even Pharaoh, accustomed to the finest silks and perfumes, was not spared. The boils erupted on his skin, a painful, humiliating reminder of his powerlessness against the God of Moses. Yet his heart remained hardened. He refused to yield.